3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about a bit of a market update. Now, this comes today from the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand survey in conjunction with Tony Alexander, independent economist. And every month, Tony does a survey in conjunction with REINZ of real estate agents across the country. And this gives us a really good sense of what's actually happening out there in the market, because we've got hundreds of real estate agents who are out there in the market every day feeding in their qualitative feedback and telling him how they're kind of seeing the market. Now, I know one of the big things that people are asking for from the show at the moment is let us know what's actually happening out there in the market. So I feel like this is a really important show to do today. And so Andrew and I are going to go a bit back and forth, calling out the key takeaways from the survey. And the big one for me is that banks are being really, really tough at the moment. And that shouldn't be a surprise to many people listening to this show, because it's been a current theme over the last couple of months. But it is causing some deals to fall over in this current market because people aren't able to pass the bank's really tough or stringent criteria at the moment. And even some investors who, as we've said before on the show, are slam dunk investors, they should be able to pass the servicing and equity criteria in normal times, they're not necessarily always getting their lending. And so that is causing some deals to fall over. Andrew, what's speaking to you in here?
Well, so some of the, are you talking about the banking side of things still?
Yes.
Yeah, so some of the really interesting things is banks are being really tough on bridging finance. And so bridging finance is when you're purchasing a house and you haven't sold your current house. And so it's a loan to tide you over. And post GFC, that certainly got tightened up quite significantly. Banks at the moment are very wary of going into a situation where you're going to be left in a tight financial position if you're unable to achieve the price on your house. And so if you are wanting to get a bridge loan, typically what they'll do is they'll assess it as if your existing house is a rental property and make sure you can afford to hold on to it. That's what's called an open bridge. So in the old days, they used to look at the post-sale position of a client. So they'd look at it on the basis that, okay, if you've sold your house for $1 million and you purchased for 1.8, then they'd just look at the $800,000 difference. But now what they're doing is they're looking at as if you owe the whole $1.8 million, and then they'll look at whether or not the rental income and your income is enough to service it.
I was going to say, Andrew, I didn't think that banks had been doing bridging finance since the GFC.
They're pretty tough. They've been pretty tough. So basically, they don't really give a bridge loan, but they will look at it kind of like a bridge loan, but treat it as an investment property. And again, like Ed mentioned before, banks are saying no to ideal clients, to dawdle clients who should be able to get the money just because they might be looking at buying, say, 3 rental properties at one time or a couple of rental properties at a time, and they want to tread cautiously with the amount of lending that they give them.
Now, the other thing that we've noticed in here is, again, current theme that we've been talking about, but important to reiterate, is that there is an extremely low number of listings out there in the market. Now, back during the GFC, as we headed into 07, 08, there were about 58,000 properties in New Zealand listed for sale on realestate.co.nz, 58,000 properties. Going in February this year, we were down to 19,000. So way less than half, almost a third of the properties available. And so that is keeping house prices relatively buoyant because there just aren't enough houses listed on the market. And of course, our population has increased since then. So this is a very, very low number of listings and stock available on the market. And that's helping to keep our property prices relatively buoyant.
And there was a comment there that investors have an unrealistic expectation of a price drop, but there's actually lots of activity in the lower end of the market, and there's a few things that are contributing to this. One is just the fear of missing out, which is a big driver for a lot of people. record low interest rates. So that's making it so affordable whether you're an investor or you're an owner-occupier to borrow money at the moment. And we've got high net migration. So because people can't leave, our net migration figures are at a record high. And so there's a lot of people to contend with these very few properties that are listed at the moment.
And particularly in that lower end of the market, we also have first home buyers being incredibly active. They've had time to think over lockdown. They've had time to build up some more savings and then actually take action. Perhaps if they're living at home or at a flat as well, that's been a bit of a determinant for them to enter the market because they're perhaps not enjoying that as much. But we are seeing a lot of activity at the lower end of the market, less activity at the higher end of the market in those expensive properties. And we do know that some real estate agents are having to not give the hard word, but tell the truth to investors and say, actually, your expectations of buying something really cheap is just not going to be achievable. And one thing that's contributing to that is the fact that a lot of the people who are losing their jobs are not necessarily homeowners. So the people losing their jobs tend to live in the low wage economy. They're going to be in tourism, hospitality, retail, where there's a lot of labour and not necessarily a lot of skilled labour. So wages are quite low. These people losing their jobs on the whole do not tend to typically own their homes because they're perhaps on a migrant visa or they're on relatively lower incomes and tend to be younger. So we're not necessarily seeing homeowners needing to sell or having those what are called pain sales because they simply haven't necessarily lost their jobs.
And again, we've spoken a little bit about the number of relief packages that are out there at the moment, the rent relief packages, the bank relief packages. The economy is so well set up at the moment to get people to weather the storm till after the election, that we are in a position at the moment where there aren't going to be those fire sales like we saw in the GFC. And certainly this report is supporting that.
And the other thing that's interesting, though, is that there's been significantly less interest in off-the-plans developments, so purchasing properties off a developer. And, of course, this is a survey of real estate agents, and I understand that off-the-plans developments tend to be quite specialised. They're quite a specialised investment product that you need to be walked through, and so it kind of makes sense to me that real estate agents might be seeing lower interest in that specific type of product, whereas on the other hand, we wouldn't be included within the survey because we're not real estate agents, but we're seeing significant interest in off-the-plans development at the moment. So it's quite interesting to see that point of difference here, perhaps just because of who they're surveying.
Maybe we're driving the numbers down with the level of business that we're doing.
And then two things as well, just before I let Andrew talk about where there's more investor interest and the one region where there's less investor interest. We do know that some markets are tougher than others. So Auckland real estate agents in particular are being cautiously optimistic. They're seeing relatively good things happen there. And you know what? It's always satisfying, Andrew, when you make a prediction. We've always said that Auckland and Canterbury would do relatively well out of this, and then you see it come through in the data, even if it's not necessarily in sale prices right now, but in terms of how real estate agents are actually seeing the market. Now, one thing I do want to caution as well is if you are, listening to this, what we may see over the next couple of months is house prices start to wind back. And the reason that would be the case is because during winter, the housing market does tend to slow down. Fewer properties are transacted. We see a small decrease in median sales prices. And it's because we tend to have a slower market in winter compared to summer where everybody's out, houses look great. More people are staying at home during winter. And so I just don't want you to mistake if we do see a small decrease in median sale prices, as we did this month actually for a different reason. Just don't necessarily think, oh, that's definitely COVID-19 related. It may not be. We may see a decrease because of COVID-19, and we'll acknowledge that if we do, but just we need to look at a seasonally adjusted median house price when the next tranche of data comes out, as opposed to just looking at what the median house price happens to be. Because if we know it decreases in winter anyway, then we've got to say, well, that's due to winter, not necessarily because of other economic conditions. But Andrew, walk us through where are we seeing the most investor interest around the country and where are we seeing it decrease?
So what we're seeing at the moment is net 25% more inquiry in investors. And so, Ed, do you want to just explain how that works, and I'll go into where we're seeing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Andrew says a net 25% real estate agents are seeing more activity, that would be if we saw, say, 60% of real estate agents, 60% of them say we're seeing more activity from investors, and say 35%, which is 25%, 25 points less, are saying no, we're seeing less activity. 5% in the middle say, I don't really know. So 60 minus 35 is 25. So that's where that net 25% comes from.
Right. And the areas where we're seeing this are mostly Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, Hawke's Bay and Christchurch and Wellington as well.
And we are seeing significantly higher numbers there. So in the likes of Bay of Plenty, a net 37% of real estate agents are saying we're seeing more activity from investors. And these numbers are based on investors as opposed to owner-occupiers. And it's interesting, Andrew, we're seeing a decrease in only one region. Which one was that?
The only region that we're seeing a decrease is in Nelson.
That's actually Tasman.
But sorry, I couldn't see that.
They're so close together that
and I can't see past my writing. I've scribbled all over this form.
So a net 13% of real estate agents are seeing activity from investors drop in Nelson, Tasman district, which is quite interesting that that's the only region we would see that. But of course, remember that in some of these smaller regions, we just have fewer players. We have fewer buyers in the market. We have fewer properties for sale. And so sometimes you take that with a bit of grain of salt as well. But we do know across the board, net 25% of real estate agents saying we're seeing more investors come into the market, even if some of those have unrealistic expectations of how far any price drop may actually be. But look, Andrew, let's wrap it up there. Now, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And if you want to learn more about property with Andrew and I, why not check out our No Money Worries email course? This is where we've taken our top 9 lessons and have collated them together in 9 coherent, we hope, lessons. And we've even assigned you some homework at the end of each of these so you can think about how your investment strategy might change based on the information you're reading. Now, I'm going to link that up in the show notes. So Tab will swipe over that cover art. You'll be able to click the link. It'll take you right there. Or you can also go to opuspartners.co.nz/no money worries. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nichols.
And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.